Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegran, G-R-A-N, group at edinarealty.com or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners. On this episode, David, Dan, and Hoges recap the Twins' offseason moves so far. That being none. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. In studio, third chair, Andrew Hoges Hoganson. Not much to talk about here, boys. There's a lot to talk about, but not much to talk about regarding the Twins, or at least things about the Twins that we actually care about.
You're just going to keep doing the in-studio thing, aren't you? Like, you're just going to poke me with that forever.
I was going to mention something, too. That's the first thing I thought of. The other thing I thought of was that the Twins did make a move, David, right? They traded Giovanni Moran for Mickey Gasper. I mean, that's a big deal.
I mean, that made the headlines across the sporting world. I think it was the lead story on SportsCenter every hour.
I like that Gleeman wrote a whole article about it, and at like the beginning, or maybe it was Hayes, I can't remember which one, but at the beginning of the article, they were basically like, for the record, normally we would never even talk about this, but they're not doing anything else, so we have to write about it.
Well, folks, thanks for tuning in. This will not be our normal format. Typically, we have a new episode after each Twins series. We have segments we go through. But as this is an off-season podcast, we're going to talk about the news around the league, especially about your Minnesota Twins. It seems like every time I pick up my phone and I'm scrolling the news, it seems to me that any news about the Twins is never about players. It's all about shuffling coaches and different front office moves.
And protecting players in that Rule 5 draft, right? Protecting Marco Raya. Is it Raya? Travis Adams. And then the Rule 5 draft is one of those strange things to me. And I appreciate that it exists, but I don't love the pressure that if you pick a guy up, you have to put him on your 40-man roster. And then what happens? I mean, it seems like a very interesting way to protect players' careers that I didn't understand very well until I think I read an article by Gleeman that explained it really well.
Well, it's important, though, because you don't want guys who are eligible to play at the major league level from a talent perspective being shuffled away to AAA because teams like the Dodgers keep signing big-name free agents where these young AAA guys are never getting a chance.
And baseball already screws over the players, like, majestically at the beginning of their careers. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, once you get past arbitration and everything, you are going to make a ton of money. The amount of players that get past that is so small. So those 7 years or whatever it is that you're still under team control, I like that they can't just stow them away. I think it is a good rule. It is kind of funny, though, that if you take them, you have to keep them on the 40-man the whole year. I mean, the Twins have been burned by this, I guess, in the past, Akil Baddoo, but that ended up being like a half a year burn. Obviously, Johan Santana is the big name that they benefited from, but ultimately, like, this is what we're stuck talking with about the Twins when it comes to players, is who did they protect and who did they lose, which they didn't lose anyone, but they did pick up someone, I think.
They did add actually one pitcher, Iberson Castellano, I believe, from Philadelphia's system. There's a couple stats on here. This is from Twins Daily. Pitched a 4.12 ERA, 1.32 WHIP, and 12.2 strikeouts per 9 over 63 and a third frames at high A. So we're not going to see him for a while, but then he's got to be on the roster now.
The Twins have good luck with these kind of reclamation projects or whatever you want to call them with pitchers, it seems like, and then they end up not doing so great when they leave here. So I'm okay with that, but ultimately, like, so what?
That's a good transition into just kind of looking around the league a little bit. Santana ended up going back to the Guardians, I believe a 1-year deal worth $12 million, so he cashed in quite well on this. Are you surprised? Well, I guess the reason is money, right? Otherwise, the Twins would have surely offered something to him.
It's not actually money. It came out, actually, that other teams offered him more, but he wanted a reunion with the Guardians.
I was going to say, I bet the Twins came pretty close to that, actually, but him wanting to go back there, I'm sure, was a deciding factor.
Oh, no, I don't think the Twins were one
I
of
don't
those
think they
teams.
offered him more, but I think they were close to that.
I bet they offered him
What did they pay him this year?
Tops. 5, I think. No, 9.5.
So I bet they would have done that again. I don't know if you're counting that as close, but I bet they would have been willing to do that contract again.
It was only $5.25 million, actually, is what they signed up for.
Then maybe not.
Yeah.
A couple other guys. So Caleb Thielbar, we got to play it. the Minnesotan, has left and gone to Chicago, guys. What do you think about that? When he's playing for the Cubs now?
I mean, good riddance. I mean, I think with a reliever, they're kind of a dime a dozen.
Good riddance. You can't say good riddance to a Minnesotan.
I totally
That's
can.
not fair.
I totally can. He was terrible last year, and people kept saying that he was making a turnaround. If you only ignore 17 out of his 18 starts, he had a 1.00 whip last year. Like, I don't know. Maybe that makes me more bitter towards the guy than I really should be, but that just killed me all last year that people kept defending him. And it's like, you're taking out like 3 stretches of his season that were horrible and just cherry picking the good stuff. I get like the Bailey Ober stuff. Like, sure, he couldn't pitch against the Royals. You take out those 3 starts. You can't take out 3/4 of a guy's season and say he had a good season minus that.
I mean, that's what Gleeman did in his first article after Thielbar was sort of dominant for like 8 games in a row. But he started it after his first 3 starts of the season. And like, I understand he was coming back from injury, so I understand why you would start where Gleeman started, like giving him a little bit of a runway. But still, it's pretty significant when you're pulling out, again, for a reliever, as you've said, Hoges, 3 of his worst.
Well, and the thing with relievers, too, is like they are a bit of a dime a dozen. Like, I know lefties are a little bit more important, and the Twins definitely do have a hole there. But
like
they've
quarter a dozen or something like that.
A quarter a dozen.
Does that work? I don't even know what that
One
phrase
more
means.
reason why we know Dan's not a math teacher.
Oh, the protractor thing. I'm never going to live it down. Every time I look at it, I'm just going to be embarrassed.
What does
The
the phrase
ruler
dime a
with the
dozen mean,
circle
though?
on
Doesn't
top.
it mean you get a dozen for a dime? So I'm merely saying you can get a quarter. You can get a dozen lefties for a quarter. That's all I mean.
Dan, I was stretching to make fun of you, and you just justified it. It was just really nice. Thank you for doing that. So we should talk here quick about a couple of the other moves. We talked briefly about Kirilloff retiring last episode, and then Farmer was bought out, and he signed with the Rockies. The big one, though, boys, Max Kepler, who we assumed wouldn't return, has signed a deal with the Phillies, and he's willing to play left field, which, first of all kidding aside, the best right fielder in baseball is saying that he's going to play left field. Why on earth would he
All
do
kidding
that?
aside.
I was so mad when I read that he's just going to go play left for the Phillies. Are you kidding? How many times have the Twins asked you, hey, Max, if it's not too much, like, could I give you, like, how many chocolates would it take, like, for you to play center field? Like something.
Do you wonder, though? Like, maybe it wasn't just him saying no. Like, he never seemed like that type of guy. I mean, maybe he was. The whole thing seems really bizarre to me.
Well, he was hesitant to play center. I guess I don't know how much they asked him to play left, but I don't know what's the
Do
difference?
we
if he's
know?
playing
Did
right
he
field or
literally
left field?
come out in an interview and say, I'm not going to play center? Like, I don't think that ever happened.
he-
I think it was more like Baldelli saying, I don't know if he feels that comfortable there.
No,
Hold on,
no,
but
I'm
are
pretty
you
sure
saying
this was
that
a
he'd rather have Manny Margot play center? Like, Max can't look
I don't
over
know.
there and
It's
say,
just-
sorry, Manny, like, it's all in you.
mean,
like,
No,
that
I
doesn't
think
make
this was
sense.
real. This wasn't like manufactured. I do think that Kepler has come out and said he very much prefers to play right field as opposed
But then
to
what
center.
changed?
For him to go to left field again, I think the left field from right field is very different than right field to center field.
The weirdest part about the whole thing, and I realize that this is stupid, but like playing right field when you're in Little League was embarrassing. Like, it was so embarrassing. If I ever got put in right, I'd feel like I had to go to the coach and be like, what did I do? Like, I'm sorry. Like, I mean, did I make 4 errors in the last game? Like, and so it's
Hoges can only apologize to his dad so many times.
my dad actually never coached me in Little League. Maybe like, yeah,
Aw.
it wasn't good enough.
Your dad or you? How-
So do you think that this is just like Max's way of getting on the Phillies roster? Maybe this is just a little bit more,
I think so. It
in
just
the
seems
tin
It
hat,
just seems
but-
weird. I mean, yeah, it had to be. I mean, when at the stage that he's in his career, where he has never been able to produce other than like 2 years, always been a little bit below average in the field, or I mean, at the plate. I don't know. I guess that's probably what he wanted. And being on that team, I don't blame him. Like, that would be a fun team to be on right now. You're going to compete for a playoff berth. You got the fan support behind you. Maybe he was willing to make that concession, whereas the Twins, he knew he had the power to not want to do that. It's just, I don't know. It's still goofy that he wouldn't do it here.
I think that's a reasonable take. I mean, like, if you could play for the Phillies, I think you'd play any position that they asked you to play.
And at his
point.
age,
So-
too. So if you get to be on the field instead of like, I mean, because he is close to the point where like you could be done at any given time. So you're looking more at the whole picture at this point in your career, where he did hold more of the cards here, and he knew that they were just going to keep him in right field.
I am curious, honestly, how his season turns out and how many plate appearances he actually gets. Because I think if he struggles early, I'm guessing the Phillies are probably far less likely to give the leash that the Twins give to their players if they're not performing.
And they have to platoon him, right? Like the fact that the Twins never platooned him with how bad he was, I mean, they have to.
You know what this makes me think of?
Well, don't worry, be happy.
Like, I think he's reached the Joey Gallo phase. It's a 1-year, $10 million deal. Isn't that what they gave Gallo, too?
Joey Gallo, I don't think is a great comparison in a lot of ways. First of all, Gallo was not like a standout defender by any stretch. I mean,
he won a Gold Glove, wasn't he?
But
Didn't he win a Gold Glove, Mr. Kufis?
Hang on, but you're comparing him to the greatest right fielder to ever play the game of baseball.
Only with the limestone. Only with the limestone wall. That's it. What is it? Bell Park or Bell? Well, I can't remember what it is. But do they have a weird right field too? Maybe they have a weird left field, and that's why he's like, I got this. This is my.
How many different surfaces am I going to have to cover?
Bank?
Because typically
Citizens
on
Bell.
best.
What's the name of it? That's gonna drive me nuts.
I believe it's Citizens Bank Park.
Makes
Citizens
great-
Bank.
Oh,
Park.
I was so
podcast
close.
listening. You'd get there
For the rest of the
eventually,
podcast, we are
I'm
going to
sure
guess
of
the
it.
names of all 32 ballparks, and we'll see how I do. Wrigley.
I am gonna look
So,
at the
and-
picture there. Yeah, it's a pretty normal. Well, there is that one little bend between left and center that I think it's not like Camden Yards.
Well,
weird.
that's not weird anymore. Did you
but-
see they like whatever
true. They
they
pushed
what
it
they
back.
undid whatever they did after they undid it this year.
And Hoge's clearly not an English major. Okay. Back to the Twins roster for a moment here. So Stalmount, Jackson, and Riches are already gone. I don't even know why I have them on this list here, but I don't think there was any question that they were not going to be on the Twins roster. And it was sort of sad as I'm updating the spreadsheet. I'm like going through Twins players who left in free agency who were still possible for the Twins to re-sign, and that list just kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So now your options to re-sign are Manny Margot, which I'm pretty certain they're not going to sign, and Del Scalfani, Lasagna,
DeSclafani.
Cottage Cheese. I forget
DeSclafani.
how to say his name, but I don't think he ever pitched for the Twins, so it's hard to say whether they should re-sign him or not.
Yeah, I don't know that they're going to bring back any of those guys. I think I will be curious to see what bargain barrel guys they can get later. But I think, as we talked about it other times, I think, David, I don't think the Pete Alonso signing is coming. I wouldn't necessarily
I want
be
it
ready
to
for
come
that.
so bad. I would buy a jersey. I haven't bought a modern
You should
player's
tell them
name
that.
jersey in a long time. If Pete Alonso signs a big deal here, I will absolutely buy a Twins Pete
You
Alonso.
haven't
I
bought,
mean, that
like,
might tip the scales.
What are you saying? Modern, like Torrey Hunter is your last one or something like that? Oh, you probably have a Joe
probably,
Mauer jersey, I would guess.
I have a
Do you
Mauer
actually have a
jersey.
Mauer?
That's pretty good. That's pretty good right
And
there.
then I have I got a couple of no names. I don't really love buying the modern player ones. I guess I like to see like what the whole career looks like before I'm purchasing the jersey.
That's what I didn't name any of my children like Byron or Max. Like I went with a cat. Like I thought that was just a little bit like the lifespan of the cat. If Byron Buxton ends up doing something terrible, having a bad career, like it's okay.
Well, that makes a
It's
ton of
just a
sense.
cat.
It's like
Cat'll die
it's like
eventually.
all the people who named their kids Khaleesi and then she went and murdered an entire village. So
Hold on, didn't you name your son after Joe Mauer, Hoges?
Yeah, but I'm fine with it. I'm saying I support that. All the Khaleesi's out there, I'm for them.
So is there anyone on the roster currently that the Twins?
No, there are players on the roster.
I mean, I suppose there are players on the roster. What I mean is, are there players here who you would like to see the Twins move on from, and who are they outside of Vasquez?
Hey, all you bowling enthusiasts out there, we have got the perfect podcast for you. Introducing Downlane Podcast, the ultimate podcast for bowling aficionados. Join us every week as we bring you the latest updates, expert tips, and entertaining stories from the lanes. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, Downlane Podcast is your go-to destination for all things bowling. We've got interviews with bowling legends, discussions about the latest equipment, and even some hilarious bowling mishaps shared by us and our listeners. Subscribe now to Downlane Podcast on your favorite podcast platform and never miss a moment of the action. Downlane Podcast, because every bowler has a story.
All right. Well, interesting story, actually. Like, Vasquez was the name that was screaming in my head, but I actually, for being a season ticket holder this year, I got to go to Target Field and take batting practice and then talk to Bert Blyleven, which was a ton of fun. But to Vasquez, he was the only name that the placard was still on the locker room. Like in the clubhouse, that was the only name that was in there. And it was so disappointing because I was like, man, like of all the guys, like that would be one name that I would be okay with going away. But he was in there. But props to the Twins. It was a really, really, really fun experience. Bert Blyleven is exactly what you would expect in person. He made a lot of gas jokes, a lot of fart jokes. It was like talking to your grandpa. It was just really, really cool. They did a fantastic job. We got free food, free alcohol, and I gotta say, I still got it. Like I can still hit in the batting cages. Like it was pretty sweet. The guy who was throwing, I think it was one of their bullpen catchers or something, kept coming up to me and being like, "You had to have played, didn't you? Like you had to have played." And I'm like, "No, I got cut in high school."
Hang on. Did that happen?
I swear that happened.
It's probably a ball boy. Hoges is like, oh yeah, he's probably a bullpen catcher. He's like,
Dave St. Peter was even looking in, and he was like, man, we got to write this guy. Wouldn't people love the story of the rookie? Like Minnesota, born and bred, comes back, takes this staff back. I mean, it was fun.
I don't think Dave St. Peter has that kind of power.
How fast are they throwing
anymore.
Like maybe 40.
You had man,
I crushed those 40-mile-an-hour balls so much. It was actually pretty funny. So I went with one of my good friends, and everyone else that got done with the batting, but there's probably like 30 of us or so, was just like looked normal and everything. We got done, sweat pouring down our faces. Like the competitive juices were still flowing, and they had one that was like a map of Target Field, so you could see how far you would hit it. And so we were doing a competition to see who could hit it the farthest. That was not good for us. I definitely felt it the next day.
Hang on, I want to know the furthest ball you hit.
300, like just under 300. I think it was like 297 or something like that. And with a 40-mile-an-hour pitch, that's all coming from me. So
that's all coming from physics.
It's not about how
Did you get
far...
your protractor out to measure the distance there, Oaks?
I think it's about how far Christian Vasquez would hit home
right.
runs.
It was just
300, just right down the line.
It was just very surreal, like taking batting practice and just getting mocked by Bert the entire time, because he could tell that we were trying really hard. So there was a lot of trash talk flying from him, and yeah, it was really fun. He was a really good guy. Exactly what you see on the broadcast, and yeah, it was a good time.
I can't quite tell which parts of that story were true and which parts of that story were made up.
If I know Hoax, he was about 10 Michelob Golden Ultras to the wind here, and he's like, and there were guys coming up to me saying what farm system am I in, and I just
It does make me think of those fantasy baseball camps that you can go for like a week. Haven't you done that too, Hoax?
I have done that, yeah. I mean, I did that when I was in high school, but not since then.
You can do that as an adult, though. I have a buddy who's done that. I think I've talked about it before, who did it with the Padres.
Well, they have a
you
thing.
Can go down and relive your whole...
So I almost did it in college again, and I'm not good enough. Just let's set the record straight. I am not good enough to do that. But the requirement was that you had to throw for an infielder, you had to throw from third to first and hit 70 miles per hour. And I never had that much of an arm. I could only hit like 68, and I can actually hit 70 now, which is weird. Like I got like the old man wiry muscles, and now I can, but so I never was able to do it back then. But I did look into it.
I can't compete with you physically, and you're no match for my brains.
Got to relive the glory days somehow.
Yeah. What glory days are you even talking about?
I was so good when I was 14. Oh my goodness.
Hoge plays in 8 JV baseball games, and he's like, the glory days. Him and Uncle Ricky talking about throwing footballs over mountains. Okay, so back to the roster here for just a moment. Is there anyone else who you would say, you know what, let's get him off. Let's bring up a young guy to take his spot. Is there anybody else who you say, hey, if we had the option, let's cut bait?
Are you saying that like Margot is, like, since he's a free agent, and we're not including him in that?
Yeah, correct. Just people who are currently signed by the org.
This is hard. I mean, because I see a lot of guys coming off of years that weren't great compared to earlier parts of their career, right? So I guess I see, we saw the rumor. They weren't even rumors. They were people mentioning Carlos Correa as possibly being traded as an idea more than anything really got pursued. I suppose guys like I don't have a lot of faith in Brock Stewart to be great again, just given all the surgeries that he's dealt with. If you could get value for him, then maybe I would say you trade him away, and like you've said, Hoax, you can get those righty relievers for a nickel a dozen or whatever it was. It's hard to say because I look at this roster and I see, well, they could all bounce back. I don't want to get rid of them just yet.
Yeah, there's no one on there that I would get rid of for nothing at all. Like I mean Vasquez for sure. I mean that one goes without saying. I think that one would be huge. There's some of the younger guys guys that I might be open to trade, like maybe Julian, if you got the right offer. I wouldn't want to touch Lee. I think Lee, Buxton, Lewis, Correa, you don't touch at all. I don't even care what you're offering. I mean, unless it's Juan Soto or something like that, sure, then maybe you have a discussion. But I think those guys are all pretty untouchable. The guys that are kind of all on the limits, if you can get something back for them, sure. But there's no one that I would be like campaigning to get rid of. And I agree with Dan, like we're kind of in a different situation than after the Bomba Squad year. All of those guys had career years that year, so we're like, oh, if they can keep that up, we're in a good spot. Now we're kind of on the opposite end, like, well, if a lot of these guys who had bad years and sophomore slumps can pick it up again, we could be good again, with the exception of like Correa, who like quietly actually had a pretty good year other than the injuries.
So I guess the real name I guess I'm getting at here is, would you trade Willie Castro, or how important do you think he is to the organization going into 2025?
I look at this and I don't see a lot of other guys who have the flexibility positionally and the competent flexibility to play a bunch of spots, and that was really valuable. It's valuable on a team that's managed by Rocco Baldelli. So I don't necessarily think you want to trade him, but at the same time, I think anybody's up for grabs except for your core. I would think of Correa, Buxton, Lewis, and I don't even know if there's anybody beyond that I would say you have to hang on to. Maybe Matt Wallner right now.
Here's the thing with Castro too: if they trade him, you're not going to get a better player in return. You're going to get like a AAA guy or a AA guy or an A guy. You're not going to get a major league ready player. So you have to keep him, I think, especially with how cheap he is and what he can accomplish relatively. I know like he's going to arbitration and he'll make a little bit more this year, but I just with the handcuffs that we have around this team right now, you have a guy that can play every position like that, and half the team's going to be hurt half the year. You can't get rid of him right now. We already got rid of Nick Gordon, so you need Castro.
He signed a minor league deal with the Orioles, I believe.
Yeah, which is crazy how much he's fallen off too, because like Dan said, he was the MVP of the Twins 2 years ago.
He was fantastic.
Remember, I said he was going to have more at bats than anybody, and he got injured in like the first week of the season.
It's funny though, because
Castro
didn't Castro have the most at bats this year? At least close. Like, so your prediction was the wrong player in a year off, I feel like.
Yes, sounds about right. That's how my lottery odds typically do also. So before we get into more specifics on the roster and who's actually on this team right now, I do want to make a couple of notes here about front office changes. So first of all, Dave St. Peter has stepped into an advisory role, and now Falvey will become the new president, as well as continue on in his role as president of baseball operations. I don't love like pyramid levels of organizational leadership. You know, I think that there's far too many middle managers in just about everything on the planet. However, president of the team and president of baseball operations, that does seem like two jobs that you need separate.
Well, they kind of had three people because Thad Levine's gone too. So yeah, it sounds like a big responsibility. I think he was kind of doing all three anyways. So to me, it's kind of not much will change.
I do think that it's a little bit overdue to have some kind of a restructuring here for this team, because it does seem like Falvey was doing everything. We didn't hear from Levine for the last couple of months, but this is kind of the Twins' way to keep people in the organization. This is like Paul Molitor has done this in the past. Dick Bramer, right? Think of all the guys who have been like reassigned, which feels a little bit kind of
Bert Blyleven too.
Yeah,
I don't know that Dick Bramer. This is not in this. Your comparisons today, Dan, are just interesting.
He was reassigned to something else.
Yeah, home.
In any case,
Dick, your new spot's going to be on the lake. I think you just head out there. And then along with that here, Jeremy Zoll then has been named the Twins' new GM. He'll be the 7th in Twins history. He's been the assistant GM since 2020, and previously he was the farm director. And again, these moves, including they let David Popkins go and they brought in Matt Bogschulte. I don't know how to say his name.
I feel like I don't know if it's right, but it sounded good.
Yeah. But we brought him in from the Orioles, so he'll be the Twins' new hitting coach. We're still not exactly sure if any of these moves matter, right? Because if new ownership comes in, they might be like, well, I don't know about all this. Like, we want to bring in our own people. So a lot of this is said, we need to be thinking, well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's what it is right now. But, you know, a year from now, this team could look very different, not just on the field, but also in the front office.
That's why, obviously, we're seeing, you know, no movement on the roster and such, which I think is kind of sad, because I think you could argue that investing money right now in the team might make it more attractive.
Yes. Pete Alonso, come on.
But how quickly can they make a turnover on ownership? We haven't heard much after the initial mention of, I believe it was the minority owners of the Phoenix Suns, mentioning that they would throw their hat in. Like, we just haven't heard anything from it, and I'm hoping we hear a little bit more soon before the season starts.
Well, I get like wanting to give the new owners kind of a clean set of books, but who really is on this roster much after, Buxton and Correa? I don't really know who else they have wrapped up that long term that are on like free agent deals or like after arbitration deals.
I would say, Hoges, if there was only a spot on the spreadsheet that listed all of this information for us here. I think it's on the
Don't worry, guys. I didn't really put any effort into this.
I like just flying by the seat of my pants because I know how much David loves it. You both hit the nail on the head here, though. None of this matters until we find out who's going to own the team. And it just feels like all of it is just like the secondary news until we're waiting for it. I'll be honest, when like the Shiba twins started, not twins, but brothers started being linked to this whole thing, I was so excited. You see what they do to the Suns. Like they signed Kevin Durant like a week after they bought the team. I think David sent us all a text about how they're dropping all of their prices in the Suns arena to like really reasonable, like $2 for a hot dog, $2 for a water instead of like $8. There's a quote from, I think Justin Ashiba is the one who would most likely take controlling interest in the baseball team because Matt is in with the basketball team. And it was all about like, I mean, it was like directly out of Moneyball, like talking about how much he loved baseball and how baseball is like such a good view into life because you're talking about like the highs and lows of a season. And I want that to happen so bad. They would end up being the second richest owners in baseball, right behind Mr. Steve Cohen. So it's too much to dream about, but honestly, it's all I can think about with the Twins right now is if something good happens there, because it seems like they really would take good care of this team. And the one nice thing about all of this, and I think we haven't really discussed it enough, our fear of them moving for no matter who buys them is so low right now. And I think part of it is because Major League Baseball would rather expand than move a team, but we have to give the Pohlads a little bit of props for Target Field. I mean, it's beautiful. It's in a great area of downtown. It's a reason why they would stay here. The fan base is there. So it's nice to be going through this and not being worried about like, oh, are we going to be the Montreal Twins when this is all said and done, or the Salt Lake City Twins when this is all said and done?
Well, and a bunch of articles came out like explaining why there's actually some regulations that would stop the team from moving because of the lease on Target Field. And so there's a couple of different things at play that would stop the team from being able to be moved like immediately upon new ownership. Outside of they need a new location and whatnot. But speaking of sort of more ownership things that we're concerned about is we're not exactly sure how we're going to watch the Twins next season still.
Well, I am.
We have
I'm going to be able to watch them on the MLB.
It's so dumb. Danny, I still can't get over that. The guy living in Washington is like, yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah, it doesn't affect me.
Yeah, so we're not exactly sure what this plan will look like. Again, we know that we'll have a streaming option and they might have a channel that you can add to your cable package. It's a little bit confusing, but on that note, Manfred has come out and said that he wants the MLB to centralize all of these rights and then offer those rights to different streaming networks, which is pretty fascinating because that's very much an NFL model thing to do, right? Like it's really annoying right now when you're trying to figure out how to watch the NFL games. And like, first of all, it seems like it's 7 days a week. You got to track your NFL teams to sort out what day they're playing and then what network they're on. Can you imagine just sort of the mess of trying to track the Twins 162 games throughout the season? I get upset right now when it's on Apple TV 3 times a year.
I do wish that they just made a deal with one streaming service, but I understand the conundrum. The problem is that the 162 games, and you don't. Yeah. You've totally pointed that out. They played on Roku this year, on Apple TV. They were, I don't like that. It can't be good for fans to have to be searching around. I think because baseball is not the event that football is, I don't think that's a good idea.
Well, and teams like the Yankees, the Mets, and the Cubs are never going to go for it. They have their own networks that they've always had. They will never go for it.
Well, what I've heard though, Hoges, is that if the MLB offered a higher percentage share of the merchandising from those teams, that would be enough revenue to offset the amount those teams garner from streaming services.
Yeah, I guess. But like,
so meaning that if the Yankees get 100% of the Yankee merchandise sales, well, that has to be more money just on their caps.
That's crazy because I always thought the TV was higher. But did you see the Brewers just are going back to formerly Bally Sports, which is FanDuel or whatever it is now, from Major League Baseball because they had one with Major League Baseball last year. So already teams are leaving MLB's setup streaming service. So it's a mess right now. And the one thing, I know we joke about it all the time, but you and I are season ticket holders and we will be paying more money than Dan to watch the Twins next year. Like that's just bonkers to me.
I guess I would rather that the teams individually, that they negotiated with those different streaming services. So at least the Twins could make their own deal with YouTube, and then that they're all going to be on YouTube, which I realize is kind of the old model, but it's with new new platforms that actually have a little bit more staying power potentially, that is more attractive to me because I would rather watch until you get to the playoffs, right? And then, ESPN has their rights and TBS and whatnot.
Well, not to be old man yells at cloud, but we all were like celebrating being able to cut the cord and getting away from cable. And now all these streaming services are turning into like a worse version of cable. Right. And we're like we're worse than we were before.
Well, and I guess I wonder from an overall baseball perspective, you might stumble across an NFL game if you're not an NFL fan. But like baseball, you almost have to seek it out. And so what I compare it to currently is if I want to watch the Minnesota United play, which again, it would be on, right? Like I'm not going to sit down and like really
You're
pay
a huge
attention.
soccer fan. Don't sell yourself short. Now we know.
But it's
what a game, what a finish.
But it's frustrating to me that like I just can't like turn on a network and watch them. Like I have to go buy a separate package through Apple TV. It's a whole thing. And it's like I'm not going to follow that team close enough that I'm willing to pay to do that. And I would hate for baseball to become that segmented where it's like only the people who already like baseball have easy access to watch a baseball.
Well, are you ready for this full circle moment now? The Ashiba brothers actually have all Suns game available for free for residents of Arizona. So they don't pay for it at all. It's on
Do they really?
It's on network TV. It's on like whatever their own thing that you can get from an antenna. Wow. Honest to God, boys, this has to happen. Like I want this
You just
so
talked
bad.
about antennas. Like, are we going to be reattaching
Well, it's like
the rabbit ears?
yeah,
to
I
the
mean,
top or whatever it is.
Digital antennas, Dan. Oh my goodness! There are times when I wonder how old Dan Thompson really is. Like I think it's one of those birth certificate scenarios in Little League where we should find some way to verify Dan's date of birth because there are times when it had to be.
Oh, hold on.
It had to be in the 50s. Sometimes, Dan.
I honestly don't know how to get like those basic stations. Can I still do that? Like just on my smart TV?
Well, you need a.
Most TVs have built-in digital antennas, and if yours doesn't, you can order one. There's this place called Amazon. It's on the internet.
Yeah, they're like $40.
Really?
They're like $40. You plug it in, and you're good to go.
See, I don't know.
And there's actually like a ton of channels, and actually most smart TVs now come with like their own TV network, so you can just like stream whatever's on there. So.
All these futurist things.
Okay,
Can I go to the stadium and like show tickets on my phone and everything too? I don't have to.
No,
get
they only
paper
take
ones
paper.
anymore.
Another note from our leader, Rob Manfred. He floats a rule at the owners' meeting. which I
we
think
don't
he
have
just did
time
this-
for. Are we going to talk about
David,
this right now?
We have to talk
rage.
about
This is rage bait right here.
Oh my gosh.
So Manfred floats this idea of a golden at bat rule, which would basically allow teams to use a batter regardless of their current spot in the batting order once per game.
Hang on a minute. We could use a pinch.
More out of that sounder, at least. That would be good.
It doesn't quite there's so many questions that this leads to, but just assume they found a way to make sure that somebody can take an at bat whenever you want during the game once. Which I've seen all these people try and justify it and like put limiters on it about when it can actually be used. Boys, your initial thoughts about this golden at bat
It's
rule?
never going to happen. It was just like that was something fun that we talked about. It is never ever going to happen.
You know what would happen is that Rocco Baldelli would be like,
He'd be in heaven.
top of the fourth. We got two guys on, one guy out. Sure. Where's Royce? Royce, get up there.
100%.
I think that's what he would
No,
do.
that would be a logical move. Rocco would use it because he doesn't want a lefty in the second inning because they used an opener.
Where's
and
Manny?
Rocco-
Put up an
Can we
0 for
get Manny
30
out
guy.
here?
He would be the only guy who ever got the golden at bat. Well, the part that
Can't
bugs
have a
me.
lefty take that lefty at bat.
I don't know if you guys ever watched Chris Rose at all, but he was interviewing Tyler Glasnow, who's with the Dodgers, and he hadn't heard about this, and so he was telling him about it, and Tyler was like, "Yeah, I kind of like that. I think that's good for the fans." And I'm like, "No, stop! Pitch clock, fine. Bigger bases, fine. Pickoff rule, fine. The shift still makes me mad, but fine. We are not doing this. We can't. It's rage bait, David. That Manfred said it one time. He'd had like 17 drinks and it just slipped out. Some guy wrote an article about it. Now we all get to be mad. Maybe in 50 years when we're all moved on, but not anytime soon.
Okay, so a quick look around the league. I have to, I'm not great at numbers, so I have to you got to be careful where the commas are here, but $765 million Juan Soto signed with the Mets, which I understand that Steve Cohen is a rich man. That still sounds like a lot of money to me that he's spending. And that's not like deferred. It's not an Ohtani deal where like Juan Soto gets it, but only if he lives to be 100.
Isn't it like $5,000 a minute or something like that for the 15 years? Like that's how much he's getting. Like it's just insane. We've talked about this before. Like we viewed the Mets as kind of like this Cinderella team last year, which is so stupid because they have one of the highest payrolls in baseball. I felt the same thing again when they beat out the Yankees for Soto. Like I was so pumped about it. I'm like, like, sticking it to the evil empire. And then I'm like, they might be the evil empire right now. Like, that's an absurd contract. And you're right. It's not like Shohei. They're just giving it to him straight up. That's what he's getting.
Well, and it should be noted that, like, I think it's harder to see the Mets as the evil empire because they're in
When
New
they
York.
haven't won, too.
Like, well, yes, there's something to be said about that also. But I also enjoyed the drop in the contract amount. So $765 for Soto, and then it drops to Max Fried for $218 million, which is still an insane amount of money. How that guy got that contract? I guess the Yankees were so sad that they missed out on Soto, they had to spend money elsewhere.
And I mean, he's good, but that's still an absurd amount of money for him.
Oh, it's silly. And then Corbin Burns signed with the Diamondbacks, which was a bit surprising for $210
sucks
million.
because he's on my American League only fantasy baseball team, and so now I lost him, and I needed him really badly because I already have to drop Lopez because Lopez had a terrible year, and now I'm missing Burns.
Oh my
and it's
goodness.
going to be
Are you
horrible.
crying too, David?
It might even be
I mean,
worse
I'm weeping
because
here for
Santander's a
him.
free agent. If he goes to the end,
Oh
now then
my
my team
gosh.
is just in shambles.
Yeah.
That was a lot. You've given that a lot of thought, Hoges. I didn't realize.
I know David
pretty
loves
much
it.
immediately. Nobody cares. So, and if I don't care, I guarantee the
I
listeners.
promise you, one of our listeners who happens to co-manage my fantasy baseball team with me cares a lot.
No, I bet that he cares less than I do, which is what makes it so hilarious. But then Snell signed with the Dodgers, Adames with the Giants, Evaldi with the Rangers, sticking around there, and then the rest of these don't really matter all that much. Just know that the Twins haven't signed anybody.
Well, the
good.
Teoscar one, I kind of want to talk about that for a little bit because the Dodgers did it again. They signed a guy he's getting paid like $17 a year for the next 30 years, and then after that, his kids make like $300 million a year. So they keep doing this, and it's such a weird deal. No other baseball team's doing it. I get that you have to kind of be the Dodgers, the Mets, the Red Sox, the Cubs, the Yankees in order to do that because you have to know that your value is going to be that much going down the road. But someone's going to get bit for this eventually, right? Or they're going to change the rules. Like, we can't just keep having these insanely deferred contracts.
I mean, the only way that it really works out for the ownership group is they're bankrupt by then, right? Like, I mean, they still have to pay the money eventually.
But it's
I guess
less,
I don't really
though.
see
I mean, it's like the Shohei thing. They signed him for $700 million or whatever, but with inflation and real money, I don't know how they do the calculation. Everyone says it's only like a $450 million contract, which it's kind of wild. I guess if players are willing to do it, I don't know. It's so bizarre.
You're assuming inflation will go down, and so money will.
No. His $700 million contract is only worth $450 because when he starts getting paid that $35 million a year, it won't be worth $35 million in today's dollars.
Oh yes, 1,000%.
So that's what they cut the
sentiment.
value of his contract almost in half of what they actually signed the Dodgers for. So I mean, that the Shohei deal is the steal of a century for them.
No, Shohei had
mean,
lots of people look over that contract. He knew. He has.
I know he had
advisors,
2 or 3 different interpreters
lots
do
of
that.
people.
Take a look at that, and they were. They came away.
We shouldn't
thinking
be sarcastic about the best player.
We should because he placed a bunch of bets and he doesn't get in any trouble for doing so.
Oh my! Where's the hats?
Here
we go.
How many times do I have to say this on the podcast? No, it's so true. You have to be wearing a tinfoil hat to believe that Shohei Ohtani placed no bets. That is crazy talk.
All right, here we go. Where's my other one?
Because you know it's the truth.
All right,
Dan.
Can we? You wanted us to talk about the roster, right? I think that would be a good spot for us to go here and kind of wrap this thing up.
Yeah, so let's talk real quick. I had a lot of trouble actually putting the locks into place. Like normally when I'm constructing the roster, I know exactly who's going to be on the roster, and there's maybe 1 or 2 question marks. I have so many blanks on this screen right now. It's a little bit sad. So right now, let's go through the rotation locks because I think that's pretty much set in stone unless the Twins make a move. Lopez, Ryan, Ober, Paddock, and Woods Richardson. And then on the back half there, you have Festa, Matthews, Canarino, and then Castellano, but he's that guy who they just brought on. He's just on the roster to be on the roster. I think that the initial 5 I just named, I think that those guys are going to be doing the majority of the starting, assuming they're all healthy.
Yeah, we hope so. I mean, that's a great starting 5. It feels a lot more like the rotation setup from 2 years ago when you had kind of a Bailey Ober waiting in AAA. I feel pretty good about Festa and Matthews, especially with all that experience that they got at the end of the year. So I feel really quite good about the rotation and where that will look even a couple months into the season.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's nice having depth again.
It does feel that starting pitching isn't like 1A with a bullet. Like, and I think it would be a weird place to sign. It was sort of, I'm trying to remember the agent signing we made when it was like our 9th outfielder that the Twins signed, and we're like, why exactly? But like in this moment, I could understand them bringing in another starter if it's a good starter, but there's not that many good starters left out there for reasonable cash.
You have to like
so
bump
I'm pretty happy
Ober.
if they don't.
I think you have to bump like
Say it again?
Ober at this point in time for me to like think that it's a worthwhile like trade.
Yeah, and that's, I think, honestly, the way that he continues to progress and get better season over season, bumping Ober, there's not that many guys in the league right now who I'm taking over.
Right, like that Ober, Ryan Lopez
like,
is a great top 3. Like, I really like that a lot. So,
and when I say cut that, I don't mean cut it out of the podcast. What I mean is you can cut that and you can paste it, because I truly believe that Bailey Ober is the guy.
I agree. And I think it probably helps that you got like a signed picture of him from your daughter. That's always going to hold a nice place in your heart. But
the sentimentality is certainly there. The relievers, I think, I don't really know. This is what I have for locks. You guys can tell me I'm wrong. Duran, Stewart, Jax, Topa, Alcala, Funderburk, Sands, and Tonkin, which I don't think is nearly as comfortable feeling as the rotation is to me.
I think Tonkin and Topa could get switched out for a lefty. I think that probably will happen, because I don't think they only want Funderburk.
What lefty?
Well, I mean, like,
look at the column here. Look at column H on the spreadsheet.
I know that, but like from the scrap
options.
heap, like it'll be like one of those reliever guys that someone drops that just doesn't have a place or whatever. Like I don't think it'll be anyone that's currently on the roster, but how it is currently right now, which is what the exercise that we're doing. Yeah, I don't really think there's anything there. Duran was one of the more interesting trade things that the Twins brought up this year, because a hard throwing guy like that, you don't know how long his career is going to be. So this feels awful saying it. That one I wouldn't be opposed to maybe making a trade, specifically with how well Jax pitched. I don't want to do that. I think you need like a major league starter back for him. And by starter I mean like any position player, whatever. But I wouldn't be opposed to trading him right now. But I like that bullpen. I just think you need a good lefty.
I agree. And I the other name is Louis Varland, right? If he finally accepts the fact that he's going to be a reliever. And I understand, we talked about that a lot last season, and how he wouldn't want to succumb to that, but he was much more effective again this year as a reliever than as a starter. And so I do think that he's going to find his way onto the roster as a reliever ultimately, and maybe he joins the back end if they do end up making a deal and trading Duran.
I do like how David currently has him listed as a reliever option, and he is not in the starter option.
I don't think he gets a start for the Twins.
I think you're correct. I think you're right.
Yeah, I don't think it happens. So I've sort of done this in order of security to non-security as far as like what I think the roster will be, because there's so many names in the options for position players that I'm just not sure who ends up making this team. But so for starter locks, I have Buxton, Correa, Lewis, Miranda, Wallner, Larnach, Jeffers, and then on the bench for sure is Castro and Vasquez. That's not enough players. First of all, let's start there. But so then the options here, who I think are the legitimate 3 that you need to decide between, actually probably 4 or 5, is Lee, Martin, Julian, Camargo, and Rodriguez. I think those are the guys who potentially make this roster, unless the Twins don't do anything about center field, in which case Kersey Jr. probably starts on the roster.
Oof, that would be rough, right? Are we talking about 3 spots or 4? We'd have 4 spots still, right?
We'd still have 4 spots likely, depending on the reliever count.
Yeah,
really.
So I think Lee and Lee for sure. Martin, I don't know. I mean, like he had spurts that he was good, but I don't know that he's got a spot for sure. Same with Julian. Rodriguez is kind of the intriguing one up there because he's such a high prospect that you would think that he's going to be out there at some point. And maybe even Gasper would be up if they trade Vasquez. So I think that it's kind of nice to go into the offseason and into spring training, not necessarily knowing in a way, because there are legitimate spots and legitimate paths for a lot of guys. You don't think that that's fun?
No, I mean, this is
like I do.
This is a massive hole right here. Like I haven't.
It's huge.
This scares the tar out of me, if we're being honest.
That's what I'm saying. It's weird to be looking and not be looking directly at the pitching as the problem. I'm trying to figure out how Rocco's going to fill out that lineup.
Well, we're trying to figure out.
I think I'm looking at first base and I'm thinking, okay, who's going to play first base? And then if you put Miranda at first, who's going to be your DH? And then it's not one of those things where you have a whole bunch of different options on how the roster card should be constructed. I just need enough players to field the roster.
Well, and how you have it set up, I almost 100% agree with you. I think Lee, you'd have to put in as one of those locks too. Like he is going to be on that starting roster, but that's terrifying to still have 3 open spots, and Lee, Miranda, Wallner, and Larnach are all considered locks. I mean, oof. I mean, who gives you the most confidence out of them? All of them have been horrible for stretches. And I mean horrible. Like if Miranda sticks with he can't stick with the club the whole year. Wallner maybe did the best out of anyone last year, but that is terrifying.
See, I guess I'm just not as terrified. I don't see this as
we scored no runs last year, Dan, and we got worse.
But hold on. But I'm not. Maybe this is a question about expectations heading into the season. I don't have playoff expectations for this baseball team. So this is a year where we're going to just see like which Twins players and which prospects step up, and hopefully the new owner spends some money. And I get you guys are staring at me like I'm crazy and you're waiting for me to stop talking, so I'm going to keep going. I just think that there's some guys on there that they're going to get their chance.
I agree with you, but why are you happy about it? Like, everything you're saying is correct, but you're like smiling while you say it.
No,
hang on. I have a couple of questions for you, Dan. If you truly don't think this team should compete for a postseason spot, why not blow it up now? Why on earth?
Because there's nothing left to blow up. Like you got to
trade
have
Lopez, Ryan, Ober, Buxton, Correa, Lewis.
I just think because you look at the guys, you do have that core still available for a couple more seasons. I just with the uncertainty of ownership, I don't have great expectations for this team heading in because there are more holes now than there were the previous year, and we saw how that went. But I do want to see how some of these young guys play, and maybe then you can pick and choose. You guys just talked about the limited body of work for guys like Wallner, Larnach, Miranda, Lee. This can be the
Lewis
year
has a
where you
huge sample size now, by the way. We need to.
But like this will be interesting to see who are these guys, and can they actually be contributing major league players? And then in 26, I have much higher expectations.
Okay, that's what I was just going to ask. So the reason for your optimism and your happiness while David and I are glaring at you this whole time is because you think 2026 will be the year.
I think so. I look at all these guys on here that
Happy
are signed.
New Year, everybody. You got to wait a year.
No, I don't. It's not that I'm happy. This is the situation. I think you guys are. I think you're living a little bit in La La Land to think that this roster is going to get a lot better.
I guess the reason I have optimism here,
I knew that was coming.
is because
I had to do it myself.
Is because the rotation has the potential to be so good.
Sure.
That you need minor steps forward. Like this is the opposite of the Bomba Squad year, where you're like, okay, the Twins might be down 5, but if the starters can keep the opposing team to 5, we could still come back and win this. Now what we need is the starters and the relievers to keep teams to 2 runs. And then it's like, you know what?
Maybe
We got a chance. With this lineup, there is a chance somebody hits one ball. I mean, it is possible. But I do
say
think that
minor
there's enough
changes,
of a team
David.
Here.
You said you think we're minor changes away?
Yeah, I think 2 big bats and this team makes the postseason.
Okay,
no
I don't know if I disagree
There's
with that,
no
but I
way-
don't know if I would call that minor at this stage.
Well, minor meaning that like I think you could sign guys to 1-year deals. I don't think
Okay.
you need a Pete.
Yeah, and I don't think
Alonso
we're
to
like a
necessarily make the
60 and
postseason.
100 team right now or whatever, but I think we're definitely
No, and I
a
guess
sub 500 team.
What frustrates me here, folks, is look at who we lost, and like I'd say Carlos Santana is probably the biggest loss from last season to this season, and there's no way this team, what they did in August and September, are going to repeat. Like they're just they can't perform that poorly. That's the sample sizes that we do have would show you that this is unlikely for a team like this to perform that way again.
But don't you feel like with this lack of depth right now, if nothing changes, this is a team that is going to come up frustratingly short again?
Yeah, I think especially if there's injuries. But again, you have to remember
there
a
will
lot
be,
of these guys didn't play for a lot of the season. So
I
like
know,
if you get a healthy season out of some of these guys, who knows what this team can do? Guys make it seem as if we had a full team
was
of
what you get mad at Dan and I for all the time. What if Buxton's healthy for a whole year? He'll win the MVP. You just did it. You just did it right there. I love it. I love that for you. New David, new 2025.
I'm pretty sure that's one of
just-
David's least favorite phrases too. I love
I
that
know,
for
I
you.
know.
I get it. David hates that.
It's not good. Not good.
I
not
appreciate
good
you,
at all.
David.
Please attempt to be a gentleman.
I'm not saying that things, like, no matter how they bounce, the Twins are going to have a great product on the field. But I'm saying because pitching wins championships, this rotation is going to give this team a good opportunity to make the postseason, even if our offensive struggles continue, even to a somewhat lesser extent than they did in September, which was, again, that was biblically, like, flood level terrible. That
So
was
April,
so bad.
too,
That was the
though.
worst
Like, they
baseball.
did it in April.
That was the mid-90s Twins. That was watching the mid-90s Twins over and over again for the course of a month. Like, that's not going to happen again.
Maybe we'll see. I mean,
No.
like I think there's a lot that's going to happen.
Do you want to
hopefully,
bet
in the next-
another board game
I'm not.
convention on this, Dan?
I
Let's
don't
see.
dare. That would be a bad idea. I don't know. hopefully they are able to sign somebody. I think the miracle would be a new ownership group swoops in here and they've a deal behind the scenes we don't know about, and there's still time to sign guys. But I don't see them investing more. I think this is going to be a rebuilding season for that lineup, and we'll see you in 2026.
It doesn't make any sense when you keep saying rebuilding if you're not willing to make any moves. Dan.
That is the interesting side point about this, because if they're not doing well, they don't have truly like a lot of, I mean, I know their farm system is good, but their farm system is aging out a little bit right now. Like a lot of the young guys are on the major league roster, so people have seen them. Who are you going to trade at the trade? I mean, that's getting way ahead, but if we're not completely out of it, who are you trading at the trade deadline? It's weird options right now.
But you mentioned the farm system, Hoax. Like, those are the guys that are going to get a chance to be on the roster this year, and then we're going to see. And maybe they are going to be a competitive team with those guys. But I don't almost see the point in signing the equivalent of Joey Gallo or something like that just to plug a hole when you could let a younger guy play and see what he can do.
I like how you're looking at this year. I'm not looking at it like that. I'm just angry about where we are right now. But I like the thought that the young guys are going to get a chance. It's just, I think we need a culture change, too, in that locker room, because you can't have what happened in August and September happen again. And if they can do that and this team picks up and these young guys do well and Lewis gets back to where he was, Wallner gets back to where he was, Jeffers does what he does, Lee does well. I mean, it's just a lot of ifs on the offense. And if they all maintain the status quo, it's going to be a long year.
When you were in the locker room, Hogs, did you sense a vibe about the team, that locker room culture there?
I felt it.
Hogue brought a bunch of sage and walked around wafting it.
It's really small.
I want to build a championship culture.
It's really small, too, which is surprising.
Really?
I mean, I guess there's only, 26 of them in there, but it's just, I don't know, it felt small.
I don't want to talk anymore about this because I don't like the way Dan's talking. That's the moral of that story. I just think that when you say the word rebuild, I guess that means very different things to me than it means to you. Because to rebuild to me means, hey, we're getting rid of everybody, we're having a fire sale, and we're getting what we can to just
I think Dan means more of like a pause year. Like, we're not fire
look at
sailing.
The guys that got rid of. Farmer's gone, Kepler's gone, Kirilov's gone, Santana's gone, Thielbar's gone, Stamont, Jackson. Like, a lot of guys are gone. Like, doesn't that feel...
This team
when
got
you
better
rebuild,
with most of those people leaving. Dan.
But like,
this team got better. Like, you're making it sound like, oh my goodness, they lost Max Kepler. He bat 212 last.
Does that hurt you to be sarcastic about your favorite baseball player right there?
That's how upset I am about the way Dan's talking about this.
But like, they removed pieces of the wall, and now they're going to put different pieces into the wall and see what it looks like.
Would you say that,
First of all,
they are rebuilding said wall?
Well, a little bit. Like, they've taken away part.
They're already rebuilding? I don't understand. Your analogy, this is so bad, Dan. No, you can rebuild, you can retool, or you can try again.
we
Like, those are
retooling
your
them?
options.
But how are those that different? That's not that different. We're literally
it is,
talking
because
about
retooling,
gaps.
I mean, you're not
four gaps on the roster that we don't even know.
Not
We
four,
have never
we have
had four
guys
gaps.
who can take them. I'm just saying I don't know which
Maybe
guys
me,
they
even.
are.
I got
saying,
some good
but in
feedback.
years past, but in years past, we didn't have those gaps. We had more guys than we thought of. So that's my point. Is that there's still 3 blanks that you legitimately do not know who would even be the stand-in for that. And I think that's an interesting, different spot to be in, and that's okay.
Well, but I don't know. There's not much else to say. Well, clearly we disagree, or at least semantically, we're using very different terms. Dan thinks rebuilding, you just somehow, you throw a couple tiles on the roof and you can see you rebuilt
you know how
That's not what I'm saying.
when it was stated at the beginning of this podcast that this isn't our usual format, for the record, the last 3 minutes are our usual format. Dan and David arguing when they basically agree, they're just using the wrong word, and so the other one is mad that they're using that word.
Oh man. Okay, last note here. Doe Park has taken a position leaving the Twins beat, and so that's a little bit sad. He's a great writer, really entertaining to read, and he does a great job, kind of with the extra stuff outside of just following the ball. But he is taking a position at the MLB statistics department, I guess. But he's a Twins fan. He grew up in St. Paul, and so he's still going to follow the team. He'll still be tweeting about them, so he's still worth a follow on X, certainly. Dan, I'm wondering, because that's sort of your field, how does it feel when you're leaving a beat like that? Do you think it's like how bummed is he? Like, was it a really hard decision to leave, or as soon as the MLB called, was he like, no, this is the job for me?
I think he probably misses those other beat writers that you spend so much time with, right? So it's all of those people, and I bet the players too. You know, he was on the beat for something like 6 years. I mean, you get to know players, you get to know managers, I think pretty well in that role overall, and so I think that's probably the hardest thing for him. But working for Statcast, doesn't that seem like something right up his alley?
Oh yeah,
just given kind of the way that he would write, and so I feel from a professional standpoint, I'm sure that's really nice. And I was never obviously a Major League Baseball beat writer, but the travel that you would have to do for that, I'm hoping for his sake that he doesn't have to travel quite so much, because that's a lot. That's a lot of travel. You spend time down in Florida in February, which I get is maybe not the worst place to be, but at the same time, you're away from people and stuff. So good on him. I'm curious to see who replaces him, but luckily we do not lack for people who write about the Twins, and I think that's really pretty cool.
Yeah, it is nice.
They have actually named a replacement for Doe. His name is Matthew Leach, and there's a good article on the Twins website about who he is and sort of his background. It'll be fun to read him and see what sort of new takes and new perspectives he brings to that role.
I think we got a good framework here. It's nice having guys that are kind of leading the beat a little bit who have Minnesota Twins ties. Like Gleeman's a fan. He said that a million times. Doe was a fan too. So I like that, because I like the kind of overly emotional takes sometimes where you're like, your fandom's clearly bleeding in a little bit. Like obviously you have to be down the middle at some points, but I like the fan in the reporter as well.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because our podcast really embodies that sort of even-keeled, non-homer perspective. We're always looking at things objectively. We don't get emotional. We're very numbers-driven people.
Never.
The sarcasm. It's bad podcasting, David. All the sarcasm here. We got to be straight shooters.
What do you mean?
It's
What's
fine.
sarcasm?
I will. The thing about that is, Michael Russo, actually, I believe, who's on the Wild beat for The Athletic, and I have seen him write about that idea before, where he's not a fan of the Minnesota Wild, but when you're around people as much as you are in professional sports like that, he knows those guys. He wants them to succeed. Like, he wants them to succeed because he sees how hard they work and what they put into it. And so I think that's different from being a fan, and I feel that way too in the way that I'm involved in sports writing too, where you're rooting for them to do what they set out to do, and so it's fun to watch them do that. And that is not the same as rooting for them, but in the sense that you appreciate when things go well for the people that you get to know. And so I hope that's how I view my job. And I think that's how a lot of those guys view their job too. You're still neutral, and you're going to report on things, whether they're good or bad or not. You're just trying to tell good stories, and sometimes stories are a whole lot better when they achieve their goals.
We're getting more eyes too. Like, I mean, that's the simple fact of it
totally.
too. You're getting a lot more eyes when they're doing well.
All right, well, boys, this has been great. We've gone on for a while. Shocking, I know. When we don't have that regular season structure, we tend to wander a little bit in our topics, but it's been great to reconnect. We talked about a lot of topics. I'm looking forward to the season. Just think, spring training is like 6 weeks away. Pitchers and catchers report. It's a good time to be alive, boys.
All right, well, I think with that, I'll go ahead and send us out. Folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Min for the Win. You can find our Min for the Win Facebook and Instagram pages as well. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on your favorite platform so you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or a like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. The link is in our description. Thank you for listening, and as always, go Twins. That'll wrap up another episode of Min for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.